Borrowed Chords and the Circle of Thirds. Chord analysis for Frank Ocean's Thinking About You. This is part of my series on borrowed chords and the Circle of Thirds. And I'm using that framework to analyze songs, notably songs from Chopin, Elliott Smith, Frank Ocean, and Radiohead. If you haven't seen the first episode of my series, please watch that one before you watch this one. I'll post a link below. I'm going to be analyzing Frank Ocean's Thinking About You using the concepts from the first video, so make sure to watch that before you watch this one. I got a comment saying Frank Ocean doesn't belong on this list, and I think that's wrong, because some of these Frank Ocean songs really do demonstrate some of these crafty chord arrangements using borrowed chords, and I want to talk about that today. So before I get into the song, please subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I break down art, music, and coding in the context of mastery, and I'm not getting paid for this. I'm doing this all on my own, so it really helps if you subscribe. So let's get into the first verse of the song. It's F major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, and A minor. The first thing you notice is that this is in the key of C, and you can tell because of the notes F major, D minor, E minor, and A minor. The F major 7 is the major 4, the D minor 7 is the minor 2, the E minor 7 is the minor 3, and A minor 7 is the 6. And what this means is we are never touching the tonic. In fact, this song rarely touches the tonic. I want you to think about what that does psychologically to the listener, that it's never hitting the tonic. Nothing is being resolved. That means this inner tension that is happening within the verse is also happening in the words of the verse. The chords are matching the tension that he's feeling and the sadness, because he's using all three minor chords as well as never resolving into the major C. It's about a kind of heartbreak that really haunts, that's floating unresolved through harmony, voice, and silence. So in the first verse of this song, he's staying within the scale. He hasn't yet used any borrowed chords, but we're going to get into that. I like to think of seventh chords as two chords put together. So we can think of that as the F major 7th is the major 4 plus the minor 6. The D minor 7 is the minor 2 with a major 4. The E minor 7 is a minor 3 with a major 5. And the A minor is the 6th, the natural minor. What if we broke these sevenths into just normal 3-note chords? We can explore how that sounds. So 4, 2, 3, 6. And then 6, 4, 5, 6. Now together. You can see in the other video I talked about making a triangle shape on the circle of thirds with your chord progressions. This verse follows that rule so far. Again, it stays away from the C, and that creates that sense of unresolution. What would happen if we played this C? Now that doesn't sound good at all. It is musically right, but that resolution is not something we're really ready for yet. Now we'll go into the next part, which is F major 7, E minor 7, B flat, A minor. Now this B flat, that's where we're doing something different here. We're out of the diatonic. Now Frank is using a borrowed chord. And why does that work? And in order to see why that works, now we're going to have to use the chromatic circle of thirds. In the chromatic circle of thirds, you're going to notice that for every 2 notes to the right, that is a 5th. For every 2 notes to the left, that's a perfect 4th. So when we're on F, if we go 2 notes to the left, we find the B flat, and that is 1/4 away from F. The B flat is the 4th of F. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're able to borrow this B flat relatively easy in this key of C because it's the 4th of R4, which is F. This creates a modal blur. We're slightly in the key of F for this brief moment. And because it's preceded by this E minor 7th here, which is this E and this major G, we have that same rule of distance applying. We're creating this really interesting sound by leaping into... I also want you to think about why this works, because it uses a leading tone. B flat leads back down to A minor. What else do you notice about the C to B flat move? There's another relationship that you can find from this, and that is the C major to C minor relationship. So another rule about borrowed chords is that you can often borrow from the minor of the same key. So if you're in C major, and here you have all the notes in C major, you can borrow any of the chords from C minor, which is also known as E flat major. And the C minor is the relative minor of E flat major. So another way you can think about this is counterclockwise 90 degrees. You are moving into the minor of the note you're on. So you're moving from C major to C minor. And another relationship that you can see is that a very common move when songs shift up a key to a new key is they shift up 3 half steps. You're shifting up a minor third to change keys. So from C to E flat, it's a minor third. And as you shift up a minor third, you will also be in the key of C minor. So you can borrow any of the chords in C minor to C major, and it will sound interesting harmonically. So the B flat leads into the A minor, but we could also think about the right way to do this if this was in a diatonic scale, which is we would use the B diminished to lead into the A minor. But that doesn't sound quite as interesting, but I'll show you how that sounds. Southern California, much like Arizona, my eyes don't shed tears. But if you start to get confused with chord progressions, it's always a good practice to go see what it sounds like in a diatonic form, because that's like reverse engineering the song. Say you wanted to write a song, and then you wrote it all diatonically, but then you wanted to add borrowed chords to make it sound more interesting. You could totally do that. Say I wrote this initially. Well, that's a good time to substitute the B flat in for the B diminished and see what that sounds like. When you're using the diminished chord, just substitute the flat chord instead. And the same thing goes for adding sevenths. Now let's go into the pre-chorus. The first part is F major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, and A7. Here's where we hit another interesting chord, the use of this A7. The first thing about this A7 is it's a dominant chord, A dominant 7. And dominant 7s are always fifths of a scale. So as a 5, they always lead back to the 1. And the dominant 7 can lead back to either the minor 1 or the major 1. A is the 5 of D, and since it's the dominant, it leads back to either a D major or a D minor. And you can see that this D minor serves as a hinge chord. So what that means is that the A7 is a secondary dominant. A secondary dominant is a dominant 7th chord that temporarily targets a chord other than the tonic. So it's targeting the 2, the D minor. Let's think about this continuation from E minor 7, this transition from E minor 7 to A7. I like to think about the E minor 7 as being the combination of an E minor and a G major. If you were in the key of D, this would sound correct. E minor to A major, and a G major to an A major. That would be 2, to 5 in D major, or a 4 to 5 in D major. But then we modify that A major to an A7, changing this note into a G. So really, when you go from E minor, it's almost like you're just adding the C sharp and an A. And it's the same thing in G major to A7. And then what it actually wants to do, because A7 always wants to resolve to D, it kind of wants to resolve to that D minor 7. But instead of that resolution, he just kind of starts over to the F major 7. Now, D minor 7 has a relationship to F major 7. D minor is the relative minor of F. Remember when I cite back to this circle of thirds, the D minor is right next to the F major. That's the relative minor, and that means that they share two notes and therefore a similar tonal quality. So instead of going from A7 and resolving to a D minor, he chooses his A7 to restart the phrase into an F major 7. It's almost like the phrase after A7 is left without a resolution. Now let's talk about the final part of the pre-chorus. An F major 7, E minor 7, G minor, and F major. We've already talked about this F major 7 to E minor 7. But the G minor, which is my favorite chord transition in this whole song, a minor 5 instead of a G major, into the F major. So the minor 5 is also borrowing from the C minor. And the E minor 7 to the G minor has voice leading in it because they share notes. They share the G and the D. In E minor 7 we have G, B, and D. And the G minor has a G, a B flat, and a D. So it breaks the lightness of C major just for a bit. So it's a really interesting sound. There's also another song I really love that uses it. Off the Florida Keys, there's a place called Kokomo. Kokomo by the Beach Boys. Finally, we'll talk about the chorus, which we don't really have to talk about very much. F major 7, C major, G major, A minor. None of that is borrowed chords. It's all just a fairly straightforward chorus. 4, 1, 5, 6. I don't know if it's a rule, but choruses generally want to be simple. So maybe borrowed chords aren't appropriate. Simple choruses really stick in your head. And then there's a bridge. It's just D minor 7, C, G, A minor. And that is really similar to the chorus, except it replaces the 4, which is the F major 7, with the 2, which is the D minor 7. So it's basically the same rules. You just did a chorus where you replace the 4 with the 2, and it has a slightly different effect. But the C, G, and A minor are the same. And that's basically it. I hope you got something out of this, learning about borrowed chords in this song. And I'm gonna do more of these, maybe cover Radiohead next, and rotate through the people I've talked about. But hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe. And I've got more content like this. I've got content about art and coding as well. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching.